Commissioners, Commissioner for the Bronx. I would ask that Secretary Michael Michelle designate the other Republican member of the Canvassing Board, the Bronx County Republican Commission. He's here. Yeah, I saw him.
They designate Michael Levino, Commissioner of the Bronx.
So I think he's just in that.
The president went to the
The Bronx staff has just arrived,
Nice time.
so if they can get settled, they can come up. Exactly.
Can you please identify yourself for the record?
Anthony J. Robustello, Deputy Chief Clerk.
DJ Rivera, Administrative Associate.
It's my understanding that the deputy chiefs of the Bronx and their staff have prepared and signed a statement in return of candidates for the September 9, 2014 primary elections for both the 86th Assembly District Democratic primary for a member of the Assembly and the 79th Assembly District Democratic primary for male district leader, both of which require a full manual canvass in accordance with the board's policies and procedures. I would ask that they present them to the canvassing board for their review. I will now ask for the record a series of questions with respect to the returns of canvass that have been presented by the Bronx staff. Do the Bronx deputy chief clerks confirm, or their representatives confirm the results presented are accurate and correct?
Yes, we do.
Yes?
Yes.
Are there any unresolved discrepancies to report to the board?
None.
For each contest, was the full manual canvass conducted in accordance with the board's duly adopted canvass and recanvass procedures?
Yes, sir.
For the record, I'd like to note that Commissioner Randino has joined us. Based on that report, I would entertain a motion that the Board of Canvassers certify the statements of return of canvass submitted for the September 9, 2014 primary elections for the 86th Assembly District Democratic primary for member of the Assembly and the 79th Assembly District Democratic primary for male district leader, both located in the Bronx County. Is there a motion?
Wait, before you do that,
Yes, sir.
I just want a little background. If Mr. Savino could say, I know there was a vote total, and it kind of changed a little from what the original total was after the recounts. Just a little background explanation on the process and voter intent.
Certainly, it's been the policy of the board that where an election is very close, we want to make sure that the intent of the voters is actually conveyed in the results and the certification, and basically who the voters wanted to win wins the race and is certified. Even where the scanners are operating 100% as they should, there are certain votes that the scanner will count that will not be counted in hand count. For example, if someone fills in the oval for the candidate of their choice but then identifies the ballot by writing their name across the ballot, that wouldn't count. There's actually state rules and regs on this that give us some guidance, 6210.13 and 6210.15, as to how to determine the intent of the voter. Likewise, there's certain times where the scanner wouldn't pick up a vote for a particular candidate if the person circled the candidate's name and didn't fill in the oval or put a very light check mark, for example. In those cases, when you're doing a hand count, you would count that ballot for the candidate. So it's to be expected that the results would actually be different because there is a slightly different standard when these tabulations are done, again, from the scanner compared to an actual hand count where the intent of the voter is determined.
And that's why we do the recount on such a small margin, because there is the possibility that voter intent was not picked up by the machine, however.
Correct. The times I've been involved in this, I think Mr. Richmond as well, there has always been a change in the ultimate results.
Not to be capped.
The count.
I'm sorry, the numbers.
Commissioner, you're making history that this is the first time that the outcome, though, has been changed as a result of the manual canvass. In the past, the margin of victory of the candidate that appeared to win after the initial canvass and recanvass was done changed, usually shrunk, but the outcome changed. This is the first time where it changed. We ended the original canvass with Mr. Pichardo up by 6 votes.
No, sir. No, sir.
Mr. Ramirez up by 6 votes.
Yeah.
And Mr. Pichardo has now, after the manual canvass, the certification he has in front of you is ahead by 2 votes. So we had a change of the numbers based on the manual canvass. But we should tell you that both candidates gained and or lost votes. It wasn't just
Correct.
one
I
direction.
did see the process.
Based on what the voters did or didn't do correctly with their ballots.
Mr. Chair, could we just state for the record what the final results are for the
Sure, can we have that? Can we have that over
You
here?
have it in front of you?
It's actually the first page. I put it on the front. Easier to find.
The results before the recount were Ramirez 1885, Pachardo 1879.
I have here,
The one after is what you should have.
male district leader, 78.
No.
That's the 86 December.
Well, he didn't indicate whether or not he wanted all the races, or just the one race. Any particular reason?
Well,
looking for results?
Both.
Okay. So member of Assembly, 86 Assembly District, Bronx County Democratic Party, Victor Picardo, 1,888. Hector Ramirez, 1,886. Overvote 23, undervote 346, write-ins 14, voids 1. Primary election September 9th, 2014, male district leader, 79th Assembly District, Bronx County Democratic Party, John Tucker, 927, Bruce Rivera, 912, Wilbur T. Wharton, 819, Javier Avalez, 801, Emmanuel A. Findlay, 547, overvote 37, undervote 1,498, write-ins 9, voids 0.
Thank you.
Is there any other, is there a motion?
Motion to accept.
Is there a second?
I second the motion.
A return, all in favor? Anybody opposed or abstain? Motion carries. The return of candidates prepared and submitted by the Bronx Staff of the Board of Elections are adopted unanimously. Is there a motion to authorize the use of the commissioner's signature stamps as appropriate on each statement of return of candidates?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor? Anybody opposed or abstain? The motion carries. The motion is adopted. There being no further business to come before the Board of Canvassers in the City of New York, I would now entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting of the Board of Canvassers and to convene the weekly stated meeting of the Commissioners of the Elections in the City of New York. So moved. Second?
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Anybody opposed or abstain? The motion is adopted. The Board of Canvassers stand adjourned. Thank you. Please thank your staff for the hard work that they've done. I know I was there for a while and saw some of the process. Put in a lot of work. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Mr. Sline?
Yes,
Mr.
thank
Sline,
you.
you want to say something?
Appreciate the opportunity to address the board, Stanley Schlein, for the candidate and landslide victor, Pachardo. I want to thank the board and its diligent members of the Bronx staff, both Democrats, Republicans, and their associated staff for the hard work that they put in to this effort on the hand count. Very rarely do we see hand counts, and even it's more rare that such a hand count could be conducted, commenced, and concluded within a 2.5-day period for 2 races. It was done effectively, and it accentuates, I think, the need for this kind of activity. I think the board should consider in its legislative agenda, frankly, broadening the opportunity for such complete and full hand counts of the ballots. We saw changes in ballots of both district leader candidates as well as both candidates for member of the assembly. And it points out the fallibility of machines and the importance of personal intervention. But again, I want to thank the board, its staff, and its members for such diligence and hard work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Steve, do we need to just take roll call again?
We have the roll call, same, just want to announce that all the same members are present.
For the record, all the same members are present. Next on the agenda is hearing on COU Prima Facie Report on certificates of nomination and related matters for the November 4th, 2014 general election.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. We have one item on this prima facie list concerning the Kings County Republican Certificate of Nomination for Supreme Court Justices, which was due on September 23rd and was filed late on September 24th.
Appearances. Gene Baradelli for the Brooklyn Republican Party. Good afternoon, Commissioners, Mr. President. I come to, first of all, offer my apologies to the board for this late filing, and especially to my commissioner for this filing. The only explanation I can give you is the truth, and that is on the night that I was supposed to come to file, my father, who I've been caring for. He has COPD and congestive heart failure, and also he has a defibrillator implanted in his chest. The defibrillator went off, and I remained close to home to see if he required to go to the hospital. On the advice of his doctor from Maimonides Medical Center, Dr. Greenberg, he said that if the device would have gone off again, he would have advised us to go in after we called in service. And the device did not go off. By that time, the deadline had passed, and I came the next day after getting some needed rest to file the documents. I apologize to the board, I apologize to my chairman for the record, and for the judicial delegates who put in the time to meet, and to the candidates who took the time to meet with the judicial convention. This is all on me, and I apologize to the board for the inconvenience of having to put this on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you for your honesty. Mr. Richmond, there is no latitude with this, is that correct?
Correct, Commissioners. The statutory framework for deadlines of filing petitions, certificates of nominations, acceptances is mandatory and is specific. The deadline was midnight, September 23rd, for filing certificates of nomination.
And for the record, I just want to make sure that the board knows that the candidates that were proposed to be nominated are the same candidates that will be appearing on the Democratic line. So while they would have had a second line, that line presumably will remain blank, but no other candidate was prejudiced by that.
Commissioners, we were open to midnight on the 23rd as required by the election law. Mr. Graves, staff at the CRU and the front counter were present to receive any such nomination because Kings County wasn't the only one who were waiting for nomination.
What is the appeal process for waiver or extension of deadline?
There is no administrative process under the election law. The law establishes firm, fixed, and unyielding deadlines. If you do not file in time, you do not qualify for the ballots. Both we and the courts in the state of New York are without equity jurisdiction to extend those deadlines. This is a matter of strict statutory construction.
Commissioner Yumi?
Yeah, well, the rules are pretty well set, but perhaps application to Supreme Court in Kings County might help and sort of do the trick, given the substantial reason and unfortunate circumstance that led up to this, and maybe that might be something. It's certainly not a slam dunk, but courts, the Supreme Court of the state of New York has extraordinary powers from time to time, and you might be able to do something there. But unfortunately, even though many of us would like to be able to help on this, we're really constrained by the statute. Sometimes the courts, through their own wisdom, are not so constrained. But this is pretty much a problem, and it has happened historically to other counties, and in fact, one year, which is almost unfortunately a shoe-in victory, the New York County Democrats missed it and had no candidates for judgeship one year in the late 80s, early 90s because of an error in the filing. But there is certainly precedent that we can't really do anything, but you might try the courts.
And I absolutely do understand that, and I appreciate the advice. Thank you very much, and thank you for the words.
Commissioner sentiments and sorry that it's turning out this way, but we're all doing development. First things first, we hope that your dad feels better and he's getting better, and
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, there is no getting better from this, but I appreciate the sentiments. I truly do.
Mrs. Burdell, you were the only one that had these documents in your possession at that time.
I had the documents in my possession. I was actually generating the documents. I was elected the secretary of the convention. It was my responsibility to create the documents and to file them, and the circumstance that I recounted occurred.
Well, hopefully, if you do go the path of the Supreme Court, that they will temper justice with mercy and echo the sentiments of this board, who is unfortunately handcuffed at this time by statute.
I came in knowing that you were all handcuffed, but I felt that because of my relationship and the years at this podium before you, that you deserve the explanation. So thank you again for
Thank
your
you for
kind
the
words.
respect of the
I'd
person.
just like to note that one of Mr. Richmond's predecessors is one of the judges who unfortunately will lose the glorious Republican line, apparently.
Yes.
So we wish you a lot of luck in doing
Thank you very much.
Is there a motion to adopt the CIU Common Pleasure Report? So moved by Commissioner Plateau, is there a second? All in favor? Anybody opposed or abstaining? The motion carries.
And thank you again for your time and patience.
Thank you. I'm moving on to item number 3, the minutes from September 23rd, 2014. Has everybody had an opportunity to review them? Yes? Motion to adopt them? Motion been made, I'll second it, and this is with the amendments as laid out by myself and Dawn Sandow, correct? The motion's been made, it's been seconded, is all in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed or abstaining? Motion carries. The minutes are adopted, they should be posted on the web. Number 3, Michael Ryan.
I do, and what I'm going to ask the commissioners to consider before we get into some of the details is I don't believe that we're going to be able to resolve ballot layout issues today due to circumstances that are wholly beyond the control of the New York City Board of Elections, including litigation and some other matters that may in fact be pending before the state. So I'm going to ask the commissioners to come to some consensus about a ballot layout committee meeting later this week, either Thursday or Friday. At this point, I at first was going to suggest Thursday, but given some of the other issues that seem to be going on and the complexity of those issues, it looks like Friday's going to have to be the day, perhaps late in the day on Thursday or sometime on Friday.
So being a member of that ballot layout committee, I can definitely do Friday night.
Okay, so we got 2 Fridays.
And Commissioner Estella and Mr. Reno?
Yes.
Are you both available for Friday?
At what time?
That's up to the commissioners at that point.
1 o'clock, 2 o'clock?
1 o'clock would work.
Okay.
What's the, maybe you
We're
can
gonna
just...
get to that.
Yeah.
Again,
You're on the phone a little.
well, we got communication from the state board around 12 o'clock this afternoon with respect to their preliminary ballot layout for the gubernatorial. I was able to, on short notice, get some samples printed for the commissioners by our staff, which I'm going to hand out now for this way. And we had some questions with respect to the layout, and then there was also some other questions with respect to whether this is a mandate from the state board or whether it is a suggestion. After speaking, conferring with the state board, it is a suggestion. There was no directive from the state board commissioners at a meeting that this is something that we absolutely have to follow.
Are we talking about the front and back or front or back?
Well, the back is the proposal. It's the entire ballot. In terms of the language of the proposal on the back, we don't have any effect one way or the other on the language. So typically we print that in its entirety. But in any event, there were some questions with respect to the ballot layout. And if you look at the fact that the way they do the wraparound, and I think that there are some others at this meeting that can speak to the history of the state of the city board with respect to that. Perhaps Mr. Richmond and Commissioner Humane and others may be able to speak more to how we conduct the wraparound. But suffice to say that the wraparound is not done in accordance with the way the city board typically does it. So that was one issue. And that's why I clarified with the state board whether this was a mandate from the state or whether it was a suggestion. At this point, it's a suggestion and not a mandate. And we discussed also, you'll note that the combines for comptroller and for attorney general differ from that of the governor. If you notice that the governor has every available space for each party or independent body that they have, whereas there's some combinations of those things, most notably under column C. You can just look in row 2, where it has conservative and stock common core combined next to one O. I spoke to the state board. I was directed to section 7-104 subdivision 5 of the election law, which indicates that the governor, and some others, but in this particular case the governor, gets all of the, it says, notwithstanding the provisions of subdivision 4 of this section, the name of the person who is nominated for the office of governor or state senator or member of assembly shall appear on the ballot as many times as there are parties or independent bodies nominating him or her, and there shall be a separate voting and registering device at each place on which same shall appear. So, that clarifies that question as to why the, at least for the purposes of our meeting, whether it clarifies it for the purposes of those challenging on behalf of the comptroller or the attorney general or the courts is something else altogether.
Are you reading from the machine rules or the paper ballot rules?
Well, interestingly enough, that's not repeated. It's ballot forms of voting machine. There is no such similar provision under 7-106 for election day paper ballots form of.
Mr. Ryan, is that because you have
A particular party needs to have a certain number of votes to remain relevant on a ballot in a gubernatorial election for the next subsequent elections, so that they could appear?
Well, that's not true for Senate Assembly, that's correct. For governor,
But only for governor.
we
So
are
is that-
speaking of governor.
So
However,
is that the reason why it's only segregated for the gubernatorial race and not the others?
no, it appears that the state legislature made a carved out exception for
For them and the governor.
governor, state assembly, and state senate. I can't read any more into that than that, but I think Commissioner Humane aptly and rightly points out that I am reading from the ballots form of voting machines, section 7-104, but there is no equivalent passage or an attempt at replacing that passage under 7-106 election day paper ballots form up. So it is the state board's position that because there is no replacement or equivalent provision under 7-106, that the provisions of 7-104 subdivision 5 apply. And that is why they have made this suggested form of layout, which allows for combines with respect to other offices than governor. And so they've reduced the amount of space that the contest will take up for the office of comptroller and the office of attorney general. I believe, and Mr. Richmond and Mr. Savino can confirm, that there is an appellate proceeding that has been commenced by either, is it the comptroller or the attorney general candidate?
The
Both?
proceeding brought by candidates Antonucci, Cahill, and the Greene County District Attorney candidate. Albany County Supreme Court issued a decision which basically says, as the trial level court, there's no appropriate, there's nothing in the third department, so they follow the old second department line of cases. And they basically said, we can't overrule them. Counsel, for those who filed notice of appeal, the third department seeking to overturn that decision, to in effect ask to declare that provision of 7-104 to be inapplicable. It's almost similar to the position Commissioners you took when you adopted your policy for contests entirely within the city of New York, that only 7-106 applies. At the same time, as we speak now, there's a proceeding involving the 3rd Congressional District, which involves the Nassau, Suffolk, and City Boards, part of Queens, The proceeding commenced by the candidates of the Libertarian and Conservative and Republican parties, Grand Valley, along with the chair of the Libertarian Party and the state chair of the Conservative Party, seeking, in his case, again, to adopt the city rule, provide individual ballot lines. The affidavit of the Conservative Party says basically they don't want to be associated with the Libertarian Party and have them live on the same line. And Judge Towns, yesterday we spent the day waiting, directed all the parties to reappear. Initially at 10 a.m., now it's 2 p.m. Mr. Kinzinger is there for us, conveying the sentiments as approved by the executive committee yesterday, that one, the board has taken a position, at least with respect to contests within the city of New York, 7106 applies, 7104 is inapplicable, and two, basically telling him that we need a decision ASAP because we're about to print ballots. And that the practice, at least of the board, has been to follow the state board's guidance with respect to contests where we don't have petitions filed with us. So we'll see where that goes from there, and that's pending there. And then I believe, Commissioner Manning, I believe there was a similar proceeding about that we started in Westchester County.
Possibly, yeah.
That we received information yesterday from the parties in this proceeding that they thought Westchester was beginning a similar proceeding. Just trying to see it, and the argument that Mr. Lally is making individually is it's a denial of equal protection because excluding the governor, because Commissioner Kispin, you're right, that creates a ballot status that the carve-out by the legislature to themselves creates an unequal and unfair advantage to them to denial of equal protection. So we'll see where that goes as well. So this is something going on. For the city contest, we don't have that problem based on your 2013 policy statement, where we're giving everybody a one. Giving each candidate, each independent body their own ballot line. But that's with ballots in which we create the procedure.
You said this
Right.
board
Yes.
That was
set
the city,
precedence
but that was limited
only
to
for
city
municipal
contests.
elections.
Right, for the
No,
local,
only
right,
for a contest conducted entirely.
within New York City.
The statement you adopted applies only to form of the ballot for primary, general, and special elections conducted entirely within the city of New York. And you directed that this policy statement be included in all the future rules, which it has been. Posted on the website, and is cited, at least by the federal court proceeding in Brooklyn, as an example of enlightened leadership by election administrators.
How could anybody call us enlightened?
I guess when they're supporting your position, they think we're great.
So that's one level of complexity with respect to the situation that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, also, the way they've done the wraparound is not necessarily the way we've done it.
Well, yes, that's kind of,
All right, I don't want to steal your
No,
thunder.
To
No,
left is
I was
left
actually-
to right on that second
Right.
row.
I actually was, that was my handoff to you, Commissioner Humane, and to Steve Richmond as well, because I believe that both of you are more well-versed in the historical evolution of how we did the wraparound than I was. And in deference to that,
Are you saying we're snakes? Is that, I'm just trying to understand exactly what you're
Point of
saying.
information, what has been our historical wraparound? Is it
Right.
right to left on that second row?
Commissioner, it does
Left
come
to
back left to right.
Left
But
to
this
right.
this board has adopted as a policy that columns A and B of the two major political parties shall remain inviolate. So we would not include the candidate. So in the case of the sample that the state board provided, columns I and J, which appear in the Democratic and Republican columns, we followed our past practice, would be, I would be under F and J would be under G. So we would have 3 rows for gubernatorial candidates, and you would just have white space in the Democratic and Republican columns. We've never placed an independent body in the major party columns.
I also have a question here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Don't we sometimes go into 5 columns?
This is 5 columns. I
Oh, I
don't know,
meant-
normally,
or
what we've
6.
tried to do is 6, to have the
Yeah.
6
6.
parties with official ballot status, having gotten the 50,000 votes in the last gubernatorial election. We've tried to make them equivalent across each row, and then put the independent bodies below them. I don't know why the state board used this format, but I can see a new lawsuit coming if anybody adopts it from the Green Party.
Yeah, no, we usually, historically, have used 6 of the, there's a total of 8 columns that you can have, 6, and then come down under. And we had always, and as Mr. Richmond said, sort of not put anybody under the, coincidentally, the 2 main parties for the same reason that the legislators found that there was a reason to carve themselves out for the machine ballots, but for the 2 major parties, we had left nothing underneath them. So theoretically, if this is not a mandate, we could perhaps go out 6 columns, move the Green Party up next to E, and shift everybody else down. And coincidentally, that would then free up the Democrats and Republicans to have nothing under them. Just a suggestion. But that's what we've done historically. And I think we've fit the right in the last column. And
We put the directions usually somewhere where there was blank space in the left-hand side, so you would just put it, since it doesn't take, the listing of the public offices doesn't mean anything, except for the instruction of how to fill in the ballot. We usually put it wherever there's some blank space on the ballot.
And we're not done.
we didn't think so.
There's other issues. You may notice that the last names only for Attorney General and Comptroller are bolded, and all the names, the first and last names for the governor are bolded, and Lieutenant Governor. It seems that the lower portion of the ballot, at least according to the State Board's recommendation, is in fact correct, and perhaps in the haste to get this out quickly to everybody for their review, the names, the first names of the Lieutenant Governor's candidates were inadvertently bolded when they should not have been. So that's one more issue.
First names
For the
governor
and the attorney and lieutenant governor candidates were both.
Both candidates.
Right. For both, yeah, for all of them. Right? So, and we're not done. The state board has made a recommendation, and again, it's merely a recommendation, about using mixed case lettering, and for those commissioners that were here last November, or leading up to last November, there was quite a bit of conversation about that prior to the general. And for those who weren't here, there was quite a bit of conversation about whether we could use mixed case. The state board has listened to various groups, and they're making an attempt to be more ballot friendly, as they say, by using mixed case. And anybody who's been driving around lately notices that street signs are being changed because there's this idea that if you can read it better, if the capital letter that belongs to capital is capital and the lowercase letters are all lowercase. And they did so without any specific statutory reference. And when we had a brief conversation about how that squares with Section 7-106, Election Day Paper Ballots, Form of Subdivision 2, which in the last sentence says, the names of candidates shall be printed in capital letters, blackface type. There was no ready answer available with respect to whether or not following this suggestion is absolutely violative of the state statute, or whether there is some reasonable room for interpretation to adhere to some of the feedback that we're getting from outside groups and the spirit of the user-friendly ballot acts that have been proposed but not yet passed.
So in other words, the law says
consensus is that it's
It's a good idea.
it's more readable for the public. And they feel that this was mentioned at the board meeting on Friday, and they would like to, they're moving ahead with it, and they're recommending this to other counties. It's a recommendation and something that we would have to discuss.
Recommendation not to follow.
Right,
So,
exactly.
so we don't have to follow the law?
Commissioner, under 7104, the section.
I'm
Commissioner,
confused.
Section 104, dealing with voting machine ballot forms, that doesn't include the requirement for capital letters. So if you accept the state board's premise that we should follow the voting machine form section and ignore the fact that this legislature newly adopted a revised 7106 for election day paper ballots, which we are using, then they would be consistent. The same way they're going to be consistent in saying for the Attorney General and Controller candidates, you don't get your independent line because we're going to use the machine rules.
Right, but I could also see a candidate losing the race and saying, because of the way you typed it or the way you put it on the ballot, I lost the machine, we'll go to court.
Again,
Because you the guys didn't follow the law.
Commissioners, you have made the determination that we will follow, and as the rule says, we will follow specifically 7106, and we will not observe, based on your interpretation, 7104 and 7116, subdivision 6, because they're inapplicable.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that we follow the law.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I hate to agree with my learned colleague over here, but I think.
And I agree. Suma's left and now you hate to get here.
I don't know what it is, and we're both Republicans, I don't know. It must be it must be the water between us, you know, Richmond County and all.
The jewel.
Thank you.
No, I think we have to stick, well, I think we need to stick with our interpretation of what the law is and follow the paper ballot rules. And I don't think we can rewrite the laws. We just heard a very compelling story about somebody who was dealing with a sick father and missed out on a filing, and we stuck to the law because that's what the law is. And I think the law is, with respect to paper ballots, notwithstanding what the state board likes to interpret when it's a Tuesday or a Wednesday, they want to come up with different rules to make things convenient. I don't think we really have the liberty of doing that. I think we're dealing with paper ballots, we're not dealing with machines. We need to follow the paper ballot rules, and the paper ballot rules are specific on this, so I think we're stuck.
All caps.
I think we're stuck with all caps.
That's it.
I think we're stuck. Now, I think we can go up and down, perhaps, and have the, in other words,
Commissioners, there's a typeface that they found last year that provides that
All caps.
No, but the initial capital letter is of slightly bigger than the other caps, so it more closely resembled the distinction. And I don't know if Tommy's here, but it actually has a specific font style name, which escapes me, and I don't know if anybody else remembers.
Well, and I believe that last year's directive would have to be changed by the commissioners because the directive was moving forward, that would be the font style. The one with the specific name that's escaping everybody.
All caps, with a larger letter, yeah.
Right, the one that we used in the last November's general election.
Cap and mini.
Right.
Cap and mini caps.
Right. Cap and mini.
so I mean, and what we used last year was pretty well received. I mean, when people, it's not foreign for people to like to poke fun or, take shots at the Board of Elections, but under the circumstances, people were generally pleased with what we did last year. I think that's what the law is, and hopefully the legislators who get elected this year will think about it when we go up there and try and lobby to have the laws changed to be able to accommodate things. But
This is the November 2013 ballot?
Yes.
What was the point size? I'm just curious. Does anybody know?
It was, for the general last year,
Yeah.
it was a 6 point.
6 point, but it
No,
had that-
was it 6 point?
No, it's
I hope, yeah, no.
Yes,
I think
it
it
was
was
8, and then we changed it because now you're going to no more than 3 languages on the ballot,
Ballot.
so.
Now it's 10.
Is it 10 or 9?
It's
As long
going,
as it's not 6.
it's
No, it's not
going
6
to
no more.
depend on the layout,
Oh,
the length of names, what's combined. I mean, you have a limited amount of paper. So once we get a final version of what we gotta do, then, now, that's all the bad news. The good news in terms of timing is that our ballot unit has worked closely with the vendor and has been able to come up with a game plan to separate out what I'll call, for the purpose of this conversation, the lower portion of the ballot, and to basically leave the upper portion of the ballot blank so that we could work on getting the lower portion of the ballot completed. So that once all of this litigation and everything is done and we know what's happening with the upper portion of the ballot, we can simply plug the upper portion of the ballot in so that we can meet all of the various deadlines that we need to meet in terms of producing the ballots. And one of the reasons why we need the meeting by this week, without question, and I neglected to mention it, is that our deadline to mail out the military ballots and be in compliance with the MOVE Act is Friday, October 3rd. So we need to
vote on this next week.
Well, we need the ballot, ultimately, when this whole conversation's done and we've finished up, I need a motion from the Board of Commissioners authorizing the ballot committee to authorize what needs to be done to comply with the MOVE Act. You know, right, exactly right, so that we can get that all out. And then, if there is authority beyond that, look, every day that our ballot folks have to produce ballots is precious. So the quicker we can get that decision done, the more I would like it, the more I feel comfortable. We absolutely need authorization for the militaries and the overseas, right, by Friday. I would prefer, my preference would be that same authorization extend to the absentees as well, and even the election day ballots, but that is ultimately, a full board decision. I think we can live with that, a portion of that decision being deferred to next Tuesday, but we're really starting to get tight. Time is getting tight on us, and a bunch of it's beyond our control, unfortunately.
I think we should limit this to the military, and then we'll reconsider it for all the other ones next Tuesday. Not to limit the authority of our Cracker Jack Executive Committee, but I think that it's an important enough issue that the full board ought to try and be able to weigh in on it. I know, I'm sure the other commissioners would like to have a say on this. We need to get the military ones done. I don't know how you're going to do it if they got to go out on Friday and you're having a meeting at 1 o'clock.
They have to be in the mail Saturday.
But we need the decision by
It's
Friday.
32 days before we have to make.
Right.
I'm posting it on the website.
Then I misheard him where he misspoke.
Right, I may have
The last
misspoke.
day was on
What
Friday.
I meant to convey was we need the decision on Friday.
Okay.
All right, so,
Then as a motion, is there a second? Second. All in favor? Anybody opposed or abstain? The motion carries.
Is there any chance that the members of the ballot committee can meet today after this meeting?
we're not gonna have the answers that we need. We're waiting, we're still waiting for the litigation, which, is happening. So until it's concluded, was it scheduled for Thursday?
Well, the notice of appeal was filed by the candidates, notices late yesterday. They were waiting to hear from the clerk of the appellate division as to the scheduling. They were hoping that the decision would come down today. They're prepared to have their briefs in tomorrow, and they would hope oral argument on Thursday.
So how do we know that we're going to have a decision?
They're gonna have to go out according to, there's no decision, they go out.
Currently,
What we generally do is we go with what it is on the day that it has to be done. So if there's no contrary court order, we generally would do it based on what we have.
Right.
Two observations, two bottom lines I think we should consider. One, that in any event, our print size should not be less than 8 point. regardless of what deliberations go on. That should come out the other end, suggestion. And secondly, that there be prominent instructions on the front side of the ballot, letting the voter know that there are proposals or additional items to vote on the backside. I'm just using the word prominent. I don't know how you'll do it. You know, I don't need any more discussion about real estate
No, you
and
have the instructions
mini
on the
cap,
separate
big
sheet.
cap, bottom line, so that the voter knows there's some information on that front side that lets them know, flip it over, there's something else that you should look at and consider voting for. And I just ask that the ballot committee, the exec committee, the senior staff take those observations under advisement as you conduct your deliberations and make these one is an emergency decision that has to be made by Friday, and then we can revisit the rest of what goes on at our next meeting.
We're sort of constrained by the people running in terms of the font size. The whole point of limiting the languages to 3 was to enable us to have larger font size. But, you know, we're stuck with whatever, you know, how many races there are and how many parties there are in terms of size, and that's your real estate issue. But we would certainly make every effort to make the font as large as possible so that
That's
people
it.
can read.
Because
You know, it's hard to handcuff them with that. I think it's in everybody's interest, and, you know, we have been coining the phrase that the print is too damn small, marketing from the rent is too damn high party. And I think all of the commissioners would agree with you that we have to have as large a font as is practicable under the circumstances.
And when I was on the ballot committee, one of the problems is that when we try to mandate an 8.9 or a 9 or a 10, what happens is we could wind up going to a 2-page ballot, which is more complicated on a voter giving them 2 of them. So that's why this font size is going to be try to use as the biggest one, but we have to look at all the last names. That's why we only put 3 names on the ballot, 3 languages
Instead of 5.
instead of the 5 in Queens.
And then there's
Staten
also-
Island had that.
Right, and then there's also
You had a lot of real
a
estate.
lot of real estate and really, really tiny print.
Complexity notwithstanding.
And then there's,
Having the ballot committee meeting on Friday, I don't envision it possibly being 8.
I don't think we're in a position to determine that one way or the other right this minute. It really is gonna, it depends.
yeah.
And I gotta say, as the person who's charged with the responsibility of answering all of the questions about the font size, and I probably answered more questions about 6-point font last year than would last a lifetime, certainly the staff got it drilled into them that we need to make it as big as possible. There's no question about that. So these are a lot more complex than you know people might think when you consider all of the legal requirements, you know, and practical requirements that go into it. As a matter of fact, you know, when we opened up the ballot committee last year to some of the good government groups, I mean, I remember Alex Camarda, who's now with the Department of Finance, was, as a guy who comes here every week, was stunned to how complex the process really is. And he said, wow, he goes, I can't believe all the considerations that you guys have to give. So it's not an easy thing, and certainly, you know, we don't want to make the ballots unusable for the voters. We want to make them as usable as possible.
And we'll also discuss the prospect of portrait versus landscape and so on and so forth in a race like this, where that might even be a possibility.
Right, and we looked at that, and it doesn't change the paper size.
No.
Turning the paper from this way to this way doesn't change the paper size. And as a matter of fact, it makes for us, it makes some of those other concerns that we were discussing, you know, more difficult. And it also, again, not to hedge, but it depends. It depends on the number of contests, you know, what election year are we talking about, and do we want to get into a situation of going portrait one election cycle and then flipping to landscape the other election cycle, and that's a whole other conversation. But I don't want to miss Commissioner Flato's second point, which is the point of the instructions. I did confer, because I had remembered that you had brought that up last week, and when I had my conference call, actually myself and Ms. Sandow, with the state board, we did discuss the issue of instructions. We were not able to locate an absolute either authorization or conversely a prohibition against that, and so I fall back to my conclusion, and if there's anyone that has a different conclusion, certainly I'm willing to be corrected, that it seems to be a policy issue with the board as opposed to a legal either authorization. Obviously if the statute says put the instructions on the face of the ballot, well then that's an easy answer, right? But then when you take the flip side of the coin, it doesn't seem to be, and the state did not have readily at their fingertips, and I looked at the areas that pertain to proposals and such, and I don't see an absolute statutory prohibition against telling somebody that there's proposals on the reverse side of the ballot. Matter of fact, I even asked the
They have it on this ballot.
Well,
It's just small,
right,
of the state board.
right. Well, it
I
says
just use the word prominent.
right. It says
So it's not in 4 point,
well.
you know,
It says
lowercase.
right. It says please read the instructions on the other side of the ballot. We don't put the instructions on the reverse of the ballot. We have them on permanently on the privacy sleeve. And when I specifically asked the question that if we wanted to use that portion of the ballot to say there are proposals on the other side of the ballot, would there be a prohibition anywhere in the law that prevents that? And we weren't able to find such prohibition within the 22 minutes before this meeting started that I had to have this conversation with the state.
Sounds like you want to add something to that?
Commissioner, there is a statutory provision that the instructions contain, set forth in the statute, Sunday Division 5, which is the whole instructions, including turning over, may be printed, but it's the instructions plural, not just one instruction, on the front or the back of the ballot or on a separate sheet or card. If such instructions are not printed on the front of the ballot, they should be printed on the ballot in the largest type for which there is room, the following legend. See the instructions on the other side, or see enclosed instructions, whichever is appropriate. That, I think, sets forth what's supposed to be, and that's in 7106, dealing with the form of election day paper ballots, so there's no question, I guess, as to the
Right,
applicability.
but then, and then I think there's a lack of clarity with that, and if you go down to 7106 subdivision 5 under instructions, then you go down to the instructions which appear to set a subdivision 4, but it's not a subdivision 4. It's instruction number 4. It says to vote yes or no proposal, if any, that appears on the parentheses, indicate where on the ballot the proposal may appear. Fill in, insert the oval square that corresponds to your vote. So these things are often seemingly or potentially contradictory. I would argue if the consensus of the commissioners was to make it clearer on the face of the ballot for that instruction to appear, that an interpretation of that, indicate where on the ballot the proposal may appear, could be made to say, put it on the face of the ballot and say the proposals are on the back.
Commissioner, you may?
Yeah, again, this is on the machine ballots, but what we used to do is have arrows at the bottom of the machine ballots directing people over to the ballots. Because when they were on the lower right-hand part of the machine, people used to miss them also. So that was a way of trying to do that. So, and that's, again, it's machine, not paper, but that was a precedent that we used to do. And there may be, I would try, as long as we have something in which to hang our hat, then maybe we should try to come up with a way to be able to have some mention of it at the bottom, perhaps, say, please see the other side for the propositions and the whatever else we have back there.
Well, what I can do as well is instruct staff as they're building the ballot to come up with a proposed incorporation of that instruction and see if that, I won't use the word real estate since Commissioner Flaxo doesn't want us to talk about real estate, but to see if that takes up any more room on the ballot which would adversely affect potentially the font size of the candidates' names, etc. So we'll certainly look into all
It's a
that.
balancing.
Yep.
You're either gonna go one, it may not matter. On the other hand, I'd rather have a bigger font size and no notice than a notice and smaller font size. That's my own personal view. But it may not be an issue at all. They just have to lay it out and see, and then you have the balancing test. And unfortunately, we always wind up going with the most complicated ballot is the one that's the deciding factor, because you can't have it different on one street and different in another street in the city. So unfortunately, it's not the easiest one we get to work with, it's the most complicated. And it's
But in the past, what we do is we wait until the last minute, there's no litigation, we send what we have, right?
Right.
Yes.
So we
So
do
why
it
can't
based on what the law
current
is at that
unless
time.
there's litigation.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
Friday's our deadline.
For
Yes.
military.
For the state military.
For
military.
state and military.
Right.
So if
Congressional is already out.
congressional is out already, now
Right.
it's the state and military.
Correct.
State and local.
Right.
So why don't we just turn around and just say, we'll go with that unless there's a state litigation?
Unless they
We're gonna
come
do
up-
that, we just don't wanna take that authority away from all the commissioners. So I just assume that if the subcommittee votes to make this the military ballot, there's gonna have to be some kind of conformity. So I'm assuming that the commission will review it and hopefully, approve it, and then it will de facto become the new ballot unless there's another issue. Well, and the other thing is, taking my executive director hat off and putting my former commissioner hat on, I wouldn't recommend from the seat that I sit in, a precedent that would allow, executive staff to stand in the place of the commissioners. Since we are not putting before you a proposed ballot, I don't think that it's right ultimately to just ask the commissioners for blanket approval for us to come up with the ballot. I just still think that should come ultimately from a commissioner's
Yeah,
consent.
but we had a motion, we
Right.
delegated to the executive.
Okay, all right,
committee
I just wanted to
slash
make
ballot
sure
committee,
ballot
but only
Right.
for Friday, but only
Right.
for the military ballots.
Right.
And everything else we're gonna do hopefully next Tuesday with the input of all 10 of us.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, Mike, I'd like to know, maybe, how many military ballots will be sent out?
I don't have those numbers at the tip of my fingers, but I can certainly, for the,
The state.
no, state and local.
military
Yeah, that's
Friday.
Friday.
Congressional went out.
Right, how
I'm
many?
asking how many there are.
He's asking how many went out.
Thousands?
How many already went out?
No, how many have to go out on Friday?
We can get you that information, it's no problem. So, that was our, easy conversation about the ballots. I don't know if anybody has any more questions or commentary, but I did want to say one last thing with respect to where we're presently at, and just to revisit it again. The ballot layout committee really grabbed the bull by the horns in the early part of 2014 and made a recommendation to the full board of commissioners, which was adopted. One of the big problems that we had last go-round was that we had the 5 language requirements in the county of Queens in 79 election districts. And because of equal protection arguments, and there was quite a bit of conversation that went back and forth in public on this, especially, and as a matter of fact, myself and Mr. Richmond took opposite positions on the issue, but ultimately the city law department concluded that the threat of litigation was too onerous to ignore if we went in a different direction. Because the proposal last year was, hey, if you only have 2 language requirements in a borough, print those ballots in the font size, given the size of the paper that you're using. And if you want to go with a 14-point font, go with a 14-point font. And then in those areas where you have 5 language requirements and you're constrained, you got to go smaller, then you go smaller. Well, the argument ultimately was, hey, you can't give these people over here a 14-point font and the most readable ballot on the planet, and then you got these folks over here, and you're trying to, squeeze them in. And exactly right. So ultimately, how that was remedied within the circumstances that we are, is that you will have in 79 election districts in Queens, and then some other number more that have 4 language requirements, a maximum of 3 languages on the ballot. So you'll have a ballot style with English, Spanish, Korean, English, Spanish, Chinese, and English, Spanish, Bengali. I said Korean first. Yeah. All right. Don't throw me off track. Right? And then that will allow those ballots to be printed in as usable a font as they can be, and that'll set the standard for the rest of the city. All right? That's the end of the report on the ballot. I got the motion on you. All right, and then what's number 4?
Voter registration.
Did everyone get a copy of this? I know Commissioner Flaxo had asked questions with respect to the BOE voter registration activities. A report was prepared, given the issues that came up, a couple of personnel matters that had to be attended to, and the late information with respect to the ballot issues. I did not get an opportunity to go over this information in detail with Ms. Fasella. If the Commissioner has any specific inquiries, I certainly would be happy to try to answer those, or or get the information to you at a later moment in time. So we prepared a report. You have the report, and I don't know beyond that what other information the Commissioner wishes to discuss.
I have a copy of the report, I believe we all do. I think this is a good start in terms of some background information. The impetus for my inquiry is that the deadline for registration this year is October 10. So I was just curious as to what kind of activity the board has been involved with to date in terms of one of its mandates, voter reg and voter education. And so the statistic there is approximately 100,000 new registrants. And I would also, to date, or through September 30th, and I guess my other question was, are there any activities underway leading into this deadline, which is really, at this point, only 10 days away. So that's why I was inquiring about where we are as an agency in terms of conducting voter registration activities.
Commissioner May?
Yeah, it's not really our mandate to have significant outreach. It's really another city agency that's supposed to do that. And that's not really what we're doing. And looking down this list, it seems to me that it's not being done on an evenly bipartisan basis, and that there seemed to be a lot more. I only saw one Republican event here, and the rest were more closely resembling things that Democrats would be involved in. And I think that if we are doing this, and even though we're not necessarily supposed to be doing a lot of it, that it has to be done on a more bipartisan basis, and that it shouldn't be what appear to be more Democratic type functions and not Republican functions, that it should be done on a more even-handed basis. And this is a criticism that I've been echoing for many years, and one of the things that we've done over time is have commercials that we put out, and there was some criticism of the selection of the stations that we were using, whether they were approaching or going after certain types of people and on a broad basis of the type of people. And I don't know if we want to open this whole thing up to a large discussion of this, but it's not a mandate of this agency to go out and do voter registration drives. There's another city agency that's responsible for that. Our job is to process them once they've come in to us. And that if we are doing outreach, and we're going to do more outreach, that it be done on a more sort of bipartisan thing, where they're more likely to be Republicans that could be as registered as much as Democrats. And just looking down this list, I see one for a council member who happens to be a Republican. Everybody else on this on the list, except for things with the city bar, would be more with a significant Democratic slant. So if we are going to do this, it's got to be at least even-handed, and not use the resources of the city of New York to register people for just one party and not on a balanced basis.
Well, we do send out bipartisan teams, I know that, and we fulfill requests anytime they come into the general office. In the borough of the Bronx, what we do, Commissioner Perez wasn't on board yet, but we send out, we've started a team where we contact all the community boards and neighborhood associations and ask them if they have all the materials for voter registration, and sometimes send out representatives.
And the majority of our attendance at these events is by invitation. And we try not to refuse anyone. I mean, occasionally there are times where there's a conflict from a pre-existing commitment, but we try not to refuse anyone because, you know, it's been my belief that that is an extension of what we do. If we're getting a request from, you know, a community event to make the Board of Elections more accessible to the community, then that's a request that we should to try to honor.
In terms of delivering materials, not
Yeah, 'cause
commandeering a
people on
table,
overtime.
using our people at a left-leaning or whatever political leaning event, and using our people at a table registering folks. That doesn't seem to resonate with me.
A lot of times they have a request, if you see how the executive office, these requests that come in too, they're also requesting that the machines go with them. They're having an event and they want to continue to educate the public on how to use the voting system. So, you know, of course, we send, you know, the equipment out.
Right.
We also send voter registrations, and we do send a bipartisan team.
I mean, when the new voting machines went into place, we had a significant outreach budget to educate the public on the new voting system. Once those monies were expended, the outreach then scaled, obviously, way back. But I do believe as new voters come along, and for those folks that, you know, maybe aren't as familiar with the system, when we get requests, for example, last Tuesday, we were at the National Voter Registration Drive that was organized not only in New York City, nationally, you know, by the League of Women Voters, and we played a prominent role in that. We supplied machines. They had a mock election, a non-political mock election, just to, you know, just to show people. You know, they came up with questions. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but they weren't anything to do with politics. Just to show people how the things work. Ms. Duran and Ms. Gray were in period costumes, dressed up as suffragettes. You know, when Ms. Gray actually had brown hair, I almost didn't recognize her. But in any event, we, you know, we participated, and I think those things are important. So, you know, ultimately, I don't know how we turn down those requests.
I don't think we do. I mean, I guess if you have organizations on the Republican side, feel free to give them our information, and we'll be more than happy to go there. I mean, I don't think we particularly pick what events to go to. As
Especially a lot of these issues.
we're invited, we go.
We just participated in National Night Out, which was a national event. Every borough participated in that, and that's a big event that we do. And it's right before the deadline. We do that every year.
Yes, Mr. Richmond.
Just, Commissioners, you may want to take a look, there is a statutory responsibility for the board to conduct voter registration activities. Annually, is supposed to produce a voter registration action plan set forth in our annual report for the future years. We also supposed to have a description of what we did in the past years, as well as to assist with the agency-based registration, including registration, especially for those identifiable groups of persons historically underrepresented on the roll of registered voters, as well as work with schools. It's a statutory mandate that the legislature added. It also mandates the creation of a voter registration coordinator position, which we did as well.
Could you cite that?
Yes, section 3-212 of the election law, subdivision 4B.
Thank you.
And we also have a social media team. Your predecessor, Commissioner Dent, was on outreach team and helped us create a social media team which notified the public through several mediums of deadlines and registration dates and how to go about it.
You should let us know where the commercials are that we run.
They have
I
online
think they're on the
videos.
website.
Online
I
videos as well.
looked at some of these. Okay.
Anything else? I think Mr. Flax has his hand up.
Alan Flax, FLACKS, New York County Democratic Committee. A, B, C, D, I think I'll need about 200 seconds. I'm a little confused about the election board's English here. You use upload when the term in the field is download. You use download when the term is upload. You revert the legal definitions of domicile and residence are reversed in the election law. And now you talk about font, which is its type style, and you're using that to indicate size instead of so it's a little confusing to understand this language. When you talk about font, it's a type style. Now,
Mr. Flash, you're aware of what we're talking about, so I'm just trying to figure out what the point of that is.
I'm just pointing out that you seem to reverse language, like domicile has a legal definition, but for the purposes of the election law, it's residence. And you say font, but you really mean size, big, tiny,
No, we
but
mean
it's not
both,
style.
sir. I think we mean both. We mean both size of the type and the font, because we were able to come up with a font using a smaller type size that was more readable. So
Yes.
we are concerned both with type size and with font.
Yes, you are.
I know.
So when you're referring to size, you use the word font. All right. Now, I just wanted to point out something here. I don't know if I can be heard. The commissioners, when they certify election returns, you might say it's quasi pro forma. But you correct me if I'm wrong on anything here, as I know Mr. Remain shall. But Mr. Shulkin, I think, voted on his own tallies. It's like you're notarizing your own statement. I don't mean affirmations, an attorney's affirmation, but I just wonder why that's kosher, even though it's pro forma. Perhaps he should not have certified his own work and abstained on that. Before I get the most important point on write-ins, the dress code that you adopted, which I believe I saw also in the poll workers manual, is rather mystifying. No baseball caps. Scotty Reston of the New York Times once wrote, more and more late middle-aged men are wearing baseball caps. Why? Team spirit? No, we're balding. also the issue of shoes, no sneakers. I suggest you write in that women must wear shoes with a Cuban heel, no more than 1.5 inches. Then also on skirt lengths. Who's going to measure this? Is this
Mr.
a
Flex,
Catholic
is
school?
this your preference, or?
Well,
Are you just
why do you
talking, or-
get involved with this? We're not talking about indecent, someone shows up at a polling place wearing a topless
Get to the
bikini.
point.
It is important. Who's gonna measure a woman's, the length of her skirt?
Are you
Is this a
volunteering, Mr.
yeshiva?
Flex?
A topless bikini is not proper language.
Yes, there is a bikini that has a top and bottom, but this would be just the bottom. Bare-breasted, which is legal in the city of New York. Now that I have your attention, I wish to point out when I hear earlier, Mr. Humane says, follow the law. Your recording of write-ins is just wrong. You just can't say, oh, someone writes Mickey Mouse, not a viable candidate, so we won't do that. Last year, I received a number of write-in votes throughout the county for a particular office, and I was told, oh, someone misspelled your name, so we changed it from FLAX to FLACKS. You don't do that. Again, that boy up in Albany, Doug Kellner, and the other commissioners there say, you just can't avoid writing in. How would you know that there's no one of such a name? And it's not whether there is or isn't. Whatever is written there, you must record. You're required to do so. You just can't say, oh, it's not a real person. You don't know that. You really don't know that. And so your procedure of saying, well, we'll only take record write-ins if we think we know who that person is.
Yeah. What we follow is the law and a rule of reason with regard to that. For instance, if someone wanted to cast a ballot for David Dinkins instead of David Dinkins, we would count that vote without the S for former Mayor Dinkins. In the same way as if people misspelled the last name Giuliani and didn't exactly spell it right, and it was close, we would count it for Mr. Giuliani. And we follow a rule of reason. Since you always win overwhelmingly, you don't have to worry about having the flax, FLAKS, and the CKSs, because you always win so handily. But what we do is we aggregate where it's apparent that there's a candidate that's out there that does get votes, to make it fair and to make sure that every vote counts. That's why we do it.
I accept Mr. Humane's explanation of this. Mine is spelling error, like Giuliani. Most people don't know how it's spelled. It's one way or the other. But I'm referring to putting in, what's that word, Michael? The word that they use for it? Unattributable, when you have names that you don't know. How would you know? If there's a name written in, you put it in. If someone wants to put in his or her spouse's name for mayor or for this or that, you have to put it in. They're attributable, whatever it is there. And it's just wrong, and it might even be illegal not to put in all the write-ins. After you made a big stink over the last decade of telling people write-ins will count, write-ins will count, when you weren't doing them at all. And so I'm now saying, you can listen to me or not, but there's a real issue here. If it's there, do it. If you're looking at all these ballots, you might as well write in the names. Unattributable, fine. But why don't you just put the name that's there, or whatever's there?
Supposing it's not a name, supposing it's an expletive.
Or a symbol.
Then, well, a symbol is that's something I'd have to think about. An expletive is something else again. A former
The
Parks...
artist formerly known as Prince.
A former Parks Commissioner, Henry Stern, did talk about expletives, which now are really intensifiers. But it doesn't matter. You put down what's there. It's not for you to decide. Just like some of you lawyers here should know that when you go to court and you want to file something, the clerks will take what you want to file. I mean, they'll help you and say you don't have this or that. But if you want to file a roll of toilet paper with your papers, they take that filing. They're not telling you what to file or not to file.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just to advise, Judge Towns denied the preliminary injunction application.
Is there a motion to move to executive session for personnel litigation?
So moved.
Second, all in favor, anybody opposed, abstained? For those not present, when we come back, we'll be meeting next Tuesday at 1:30. Otherwise, we'll be reporting any action, if any, from executive session after the session, reporting the following. Jose Cintron is hereby granted a 70-hour advance of time to be used as needed and paid back within secure once the advance time has been exhausted. No further action was taken. Is there a motion to adjourn? Seconded by myself. All in favor?
Yes.
Anybody opposed?
Up to 70 hours.
Motion carries.
Yes, as